And good evening, everybody. It's time to gather around your computers. It's time to gather around your phones, your mobile devices, and join us for an important discussion this evening on the way forward. After all these protests, after all that has happened, the lives of those who have been lost to police brutality, and all of this discussion that's happening in our nation and in New York City, we begin that discussion right now. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to a discussion on the way forward. The way forward. A lot's been happening in our nation over the last few weeks. We've had COVID-19, and we've had the death of George Floyd. And today he was funeralized, and we extend our sincere sympathies and condolences to the family. As we continue as a city in New York City, there is much discussion on what's happening, not just here in New York City, but around the nation, and how can we heal and have better police community relations. To have that discussion tonight, we have an esteemed panel that we'd like to introduce to you tonight. We have, first of all, the first deputy of the NYPD, first deputy commissioner of the NYPD, Commissioner Bill Tucker, is with us tonight, and we're just so happy that you are here with us, Commissioner Tucker. It's good to have you on the board tonight.
Thank you, Rohann. It's good to be here.
Good. Commissioner Tucker comes to, for those of you who are joining us and not from New York City, Commissioner Tucker is and has served at the executive level. Had served over 22 years in the NYPD. He served several mayors, Mayor Koch, Bloomberg, and now de Blasio in 1995. Bill Clinton appointed Commissioner Tucker as Deputy Director of Operations in the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services at the United States Department of Justice. And he was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the Senate as Commissioner Tucker to serve the State and Local Affairs Division within the U.S. Office of the National Drug Control Policy. He is the highest ranking African American in the NYPD, and he is entrusted to design and implement a broad range of policy programs and training to strengthen community relations and improve the performance of the department. We're looking forward to a great discussion with you tonight, Commissioner Tucker. Thanks for coming and being with us.
Thank you very much.
We also have with us the chairman of the Civilian Complaint Review Board for New York, Reverend Fred Davie. Mr. Davie is also a member of the Bill de Blasio Clergy Advisory Council, who I happen to have the privilege of working together with on that advisory council. He is the co-convener for this for the Public Safety Committee, which addresses and looks at NYPD also. Mr. Davie also currently serves as the Executive Vice President for Union Theological Seminary, has a wealth of experience, former Deputy Mayor of Manhattan, as well as he serves in his capacity at the Union Theological Seminary, dealing with strategic planning, etc. And we just want to say thank you, Reverend Fred Davie, for being with us.
Thank you. It's really good to be here, Rohann. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, man. Always a man of great resources. All right, so we keep going, and we're going to hold because we are waiting for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. He's finishing up, and lots happening today. So we'll keep going, and we'll come on to him. We have two pastors from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is privileged to convene this meeting this evening, and we have Dr. Dedrick Blue. Dr. Dedrick Blue is a native of Boston, and he is an avid community activist with over 37 years as a teacher, pastor, broadcaster, activist, and administrator. He has worked on the issue of social justice for years, affordable housing, closing educational gaps, and community development, and HIV. Dr. Blue served Oakwood University as vice president and for student services and dean of the School of Religion, and he's now currently serving as the senior pastor, my pastor, for the North Bronx Seventh-day Adventist Church. Dr. Dedrick Blue, welcome.
Good to see you, my member.
It's good to have you, sir. And the final member on the panel is Dr. Alan Martin. Dr. Alan Martin is no stranger to the social justice community in New York. He serves on the Justice 2020 committee for the district attorney, Eric Gonzalez in Brooklyn, New York. He is a member of the God Squad of the 67th Police Precinct Clergy Coalition, and he is a pastor of the Christian Fellowship SDA Church. Dr. Martin operated the first city-funded senior citizen program among Seventh-day Adventists at the Flatbush Seventh-day Adventist Church in his early years in ministry. Dr. Alan Martin, welcome, sir. All right, we'll get it. We'll get him a minute to get his audio together. All right, so let's
welcome, Sir Joy, and I'm delighted to be.
Great, good to have you, sir. All right, so do us a favor and go ahead and hit that share button. We want you to share this. They've got a lot to talk about this evening, and so we're going to jump right in. We have got the commissioner of first deputy commissioner of the NYPD, Commissioner Tucker. He is here, and we're going to jump in with some questions for you, sir, as we talk about the way forward. This conversation is how can we heal? How can we have better policing and community relationship as we police? And in NYPD and in New York, we have had some strains over the years, some good moments and some challenging moments. And so for what we see today, George Floyd's death sparked a national outrage. And I would like to ask you, does George Floyd's death spark a moment of transformation in policing and in better community policing, especially as New York City, if not the second, if not the largest, and you can clarify and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's between New York or NYPD, LAPD, to see which one is the largest police force in the country?
Well, NYPD is the largest, 36,000.
NYPD all the way.
55,000 people, so it's a pretty large department. I mean, listen, I think anyone who saw the video of the horrific video of the Mr. Floyd's arrest and death, his murder, anyone who witnessed that has to know that it was the proverbial, in many ways, as the confluence of COVID and certainly his death was the proverbial straw, I think, to light this passionate outrage, if you will, for people, not just here not just in Minneapolis, but across the country, certainly here in New York, and indeed across the globe, frankly. Protests in London and elsewhere. So, I mean, that is, I think we are right at this moment, at a seminal moment in our time as a country, and certainly as a city here in New York, where and while we've had certainly a number of other incidents that have occurred with Black men being murdered in recent weeks as well, and women. And so we have, I think, arrived at a place when you think about the number of people we've had, peaceful protesters here in the city for several days now, and the fact that they are up in arms about policing in this country and in this city. So I think there's no question that Mr. Floyd did not die in vain. His legacy will be, among other things, I think, the moment in time when we all realize that we have got to figure out where we're going and how we're going to get there, and how we're going to stop the killing, and more importantly, how we're going to bring communities together.
Post, thank you, sir. Post the 60s, has anybody on this panel seen any or lived through anything as transformational as this? And when we want to welcome our congressman from the 8th Congressional District, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, sir.
Rohann, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to join this distinguished panel, Dr. Martin and Deputy Commissioner Tucker and everybody else, Reverend Davie and Pastor Blue. It's great to be with all of you.
Well,
great, and just a little shout out to Dr. Jeffries for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, because he's a congressman, but he's also a great preacher. I'm just going to leave it right there. All right, I'm just going to leave it right there. So let's get back to the question. Have any of you seen post the 60s anything as transformative as what you're seeing now in wake of the George Floyd's protests? And what can that lead us to as a country, as a nation?
Well, Rohann, I think that, I mean, you're a young man. So as is probably the congressman and the rest of you.
Careful, Fred.
It's you and me. It's you and me. We're holding it up. But I have a bit of a perspective, on this. And what I would tell you is that there are these moments in the course of history where an event is catalytic. An event represents that a time has come for radical and fundamental change. And that's where we are. And at the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is the nation's largest independent oversight agency of a police department in the country, we're committed to capitalizing on this moment to help implement serious and fundamental reform in police community relations in the country. We believe we've already begun some things. The agency put out a report just yesterday about the interaction between youth, particularly youth of color, particularly Black and brown men and young men and boys, and their interaction with the NYPD. And we set forth a set of proposals that we've asked the NYPD to implement, which, to their credit, and I want to thank Commissioner Tucker and Commissioner Shea for their support of implementing these principles. So what this moment has done, it has cracked open the opportunity to implement some of these reforms and a new way of relating between police and community, that we've longed for a while. And we'll talk, I'm sure, about what just happened in Albany in terms of legislation, and there may be some disagreement about some of that. But I believe on the whole, it's all going to lead to a major transformative moment in policing that we'll all have to be diligent about. Because, the tendency is to have, for institutions to revert to former behaviors unless we're all diligent about pursuing and advancing the changes that we see. So I think Mr. Floyd's death will not be in vain, as Commissioner Tucker said, and we will and are seeing a revolution in what we need to do around policing. And I want to thank the peaceful protesters who took to the street day after day after day, unrelenting, the peaceful ones, to ensure that we take advantage of this opportunity in our nation's history.
So thank you very much, sir. So for Commissioner Bill Tucker, what reform initiatives therefore has the NYP enacted to address cultural orientation around racial discrimination in its policing? Has the NYPD enacted in anything in terms of sensitivity for its officers around the racial communities that make up New York City? And what can you see on that for us?
Yeah, sure. But Rohann, my name is Ben, not Bill. I keep looking over my shoulder for him, but he's not here.
Ben, you got it typed on us, Ben.
Yeah.
All right, I keep it Ben, sir.
No sweat. It would be fine if it were Bill. No worries. But I can tell you that
I got to be respectful, sir. So I keep it Ben.
No, it's okay. I'm just breaking your chops.
All right.
No, really, I think that to answer your question, and let me just a quick bit of history here. But listen, New York City has had its ups and downs. This is my 5th decade. I started in this agency 50 years ago, and as a young trainee, 18 years old. So So I've seen it all, and over time, and then I was gone for a significant time after being here for 22 and a half years, and then came back in 2014. 2014, coming back to New York in 2014 was a moment for me, having sat in Washington when I was at the Drug Policy Office at the White House, looking at and experiencing what was happening up here with stops and frisks of young Black and brown young men, reaching almost 700,000 stops in 2011 at their peak. And so as I watched that, listen, I grew up in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy. I used to be hassled by cops. This was 1969, and the 60s were, as we all know, were very, progressive but tumultuous decade. And so when I came in, it was very much male white, maybe 95% at least department, and it was women had to sue just a couple of years before that. So to become promoted into uniform sergeants ranks, and they went up through the ranks from there. So a very progressive time for the most part. But 2011 was a seminal moment here. And then the 3 lawsuits that were filed, and then subsequently Mayor de Blasio is elected, and he takes office and he settles those 3 lawsuits, and that was a good thing. He also brought back Bill Bratton to be police commissioner for the second time, and Bill Bratton has a different outlook and approach to policing, and so he called me and asked if I were interested in coming back, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, I want you to come back and be the deputy commissioner for training. So I took, it got me back home to the city I love, and in a position that allowed me to really influence the policies around training and in many other areas, and that's what's happened. So we have been very progressive in the way in which we recruit. We are now a majority minority organization, and that continues to grow. Many of the officers and classes that we hire are people of color and women, and who also are residents of the city. More often than not, more than 50% of our new classes, people reside in the city. That was not the case throughout the 60s and into the early 70s, thereabouts. So that kind of change took place. We made changes in training. We created a field training program for police officers, but I think most importantly, my mandate was broader than that, and it was to look at and overhaul training for the entire agency. And while we were beginning that process, Mr. Garner was killed, died at the hand of one of our officers, and through the use of a chokehold. So that was in a heartbeat, caused us to change and focus on not just training, but a whole range of other things that we needed to do. And we have progressed, I think, with training. We added 3 additional days of training, but we've actually, officers in the recent couple of years have received on average 10 days worth of training in areas of fair and impartial policing, recognizing that implicit bias is certainly something that we have to worry about. So it's not always about overt racism, but very much about the more subtle challenges and things that influence our decision making. And police officers are not immune from that, as none of us are. But it really matters if you're a police officer walking the streets and responding to services that need to be provided to our citizens. So we changed that. We move forward with technology. We've used technology. We put smartphones in the hands of our cops. 25,000 of our officers now wear body-worn cameras. It's the largest body-worn camera program in any department across the country. And so very progressive. We emphasized de-escalation in that training that we did in 2014 to early 2015. We emphasized the whole idea of what being a cop is about, the nobility of policing, and why you took this job to serve the people in your jurisdiction. And so we've been progressively, as we bring new officers on, engaged in that process. We've also enhanced the training for our executives, and even online first line supervisors, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and so forth. So a lot of change, very, very progressive change, and that resulted in, reductions, dramatic reductions of 95+% in stops and frisks. But more than that, I think we rewrote our use of force policy to include something that hasn't happened in the country, which is more reporting of uses of force, documenting uses of force, both not just against citizens, but against police officers as well. So we capture that information, and for the first time, I think we've led the nation in that kind of gathering of information that is critical. Changed the way we made improvements in our policing practice, which is no more dragnet policing, but rather very, very specific, what we call very focused policing, where we are not precision policing, not looking for doing dragnets to look for people that we want to arrest or who committed crimes, but rather paying attention to the specifics and using information and intelligence to focus on the right people, the bad people who are committing the crime, the most violent crimes, and so forth. So we've, I think, in some ways begun to change the culture of the agency, not suggesting that we're close to being there where we need to be, but certainly we haven't. But I think we have for sure made enough progress that is 180 degrees from where we were prior to 2014.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
The last thing I'll mention, which is neighborhood policing, and that was I think is a critical piece to this. Which
go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Rebuilding trust. So I'll leave it there so we can get the others in, and we can maybe have some more.
No, I think we're great, and we want to come back on that because I know we want to talk about the accountability piece on how when a person is stopped through to pass to Reverend Fred Davie. But I want to jump into Congressman Hakeem Jeffries and then come back. Ben, he gave me the permission to call him Ben.
Yes, so, absolutely.
Ben said that raise the element of the Eric Gardner, and we had that as a sad situation back in New York. And you have introduced HR 4408. You introduced that after the aftermath of Eric Gardner, and every year I guess since that. What was that HR 448? And I think there's a question here that I probably will put up. You can tie into it from somebody online, Morris Hopton, that says, explain how the current congressional legislation will hold bad cops accountable. I think that those two questions can go together for you, sir. Take it away.
Yeah, no, Rohann, thank you very much. And as you indicated, in the aftermath of the tragic killing of Eric Garner, where we saw him choked to death as a result of an illegal chokehold in terms of NYPD policy, which prohibited the use of such tactics, but yet and still it occurred, and yet and still the grand jury decided not to indict Officer Pantaleo for the murder of Eric Garner, notwithstanding the videotape evidence that existed. I concluded that what needed to happen, because the chokehold and any tactics such as a knee to the neck, such as what was deployed against George Floyd, or other procedures that result in cutting off breathing or blood flow and asphyxiation, is unnecessary, unacceptable, uncivilized, unconscionable, and un-American. Yet it was still occurring, even though almost every major police department, such as New York or Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, for instance, prohibited the use of the chokehold or strangulation tactics as a matter of policy. But it still happened. So we concluded that it needs to be prohibited as a matter of law. And that's why I introduced HR 4408, the Eric Garner Excessive Use of Force Prevention Act. And I'm thankful that the legislation has the support of more than 100 other members of Congress as a standalone bill, and also is a part of and is fully incorporated into the Justice and Policing Act, which we announced yesterday. that is a comprehensive response to the need and the desires to achieve prison police reform in this moment that we are in. Some of the other key provisions, and I won't go through them all, that are designed to make sure that we get accountability connected to the question that was asked, is that we need a national use of force standard. And a use of force standard that is anchored in two principles: that de-escalation techniques should be employed in the first instance so as to try and prevent a violent police encounter from occurring. And the use of deadly force should only be used as a matter of last resort to protect the life and safety of the officer or a civilian. And by establishing a national standard, we can judge and determine instances where an officer has crossed the line based on a national federal standard. And if that federal standard is not lived up to, it should allow for a greater ability for the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights, to prosecute officers who engage in the excessive use of force and violate our nation's civil rights laws, as well as for a greater ability of individuals to sue on the civil side when their civil rights have been violated. The other provision, and the last provision I'll mention in this part of our conversation, is that police officers, and there are good police officers, and we embrace those officers who are in the community to protect and serve. And I work with and know many of them. But we also know that there are violent officers, brutal officers, abusive officers, and they have to be held accountable when they cross the line, particularly when they take the life of a civilian without justification. Held accountable criminally where appropriate, and held accountable on the civil side. And there's a doctrine that has developed over the last several decades within the court system called qualified immunity, where an officer is effectively presumed to be acting reasonably in almost every instance. And they're presumed to be acting reasonably as long as they behave in a manner consistent with the least reasonable officer on the force. That's the standard. That's the lowest common denominator that could possibly exist. Rohann, could you imagine if I'm held accountable to the service that I provide to the people in Brooklyn and Queens as the behavior of the least reasonable member of Congress? I'd get run out of Brooklyn. So that makes no sense. But because of the doctrine of qualified immunity, that's basically what exists in the law. So we're going to reform that as well to ensure a greater level of accountability.
Thank you so much, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Now, I know we got a spiritual man in here, the spiritual voice on Dr. Blue. He's here, and I'm coming to you, Dr. Blue. I've not forgotten about you, so just hang right there. Coming, I got a lot for you, but I don't want to leave this point. So between Ben, Fred, and Hakeem, let's get this kind of sorted out now. A lawsuit was brought against CCRB back in, I think, a couple of years ago, in an effort to curb the oversight of the CCRB. And you're the head of the CCRB. And by the way, between the three of you, between Ben, Fred, and Hakeem, we have the three highest ranking African Americans in the state of New York, in the police force, civilian, and in Congress from the state of New York. So you are important voices. Should the police union be influence be curbed? That's a question from someone on the chat. And secondly, is there a fairness for the person who has to file a complaint with the CCRB? And is it fair for the person who is filing it? And is it fair for the officer? Or is it stacked one way or the other?
So I'll take a stab at both of those, and I'm sure both the congressman and the deputy commissioner will have something to say about them too. So on the PBA is PBA. They have an obligation, I guess, to serve their members, and that's what they try to do. I, for one, clearly don't always agree with what they do. And I think that in the lawsuits that they brought against the CCRB since I've been chair, CCRB has prevailed. And most recently, just week before last week, the first division of the appellate court ruled in CCRB's favor on the issue of whether or not people who witness police misconduct by a New York City police officer in the city of New York during the course of their carrying out their duties can actually file a complaint by witnessing that on video. And the answer from the court was yes. I think that CCRB has a very fair process. We need to increase the strength and capacity of the CCRB, and I'm glad there are council members and other elected officials in the city and in the state and in Congress who are committed to that. Just today, we had city council members testifying about the need to make sure that the agency's appropriately funded, that the mandates that the people voted for the agency back in November through charter reform are fulfilled. The agency makes every effort to receive and investigate complaints fairly and judiciously and with speed. And I think we're very fair. I think where people have problems with the agency, and rightfully so, and this is going to be hard to change, is that very often we send over recommendations for discipline that the department disagrees with. We're about 65% in agreement on some of the lesser offenses and probably close to 40% agreement on some of the more serious ones when it comes to discipline for the year 2019, for example. And so people see that. They see that the board sends over one form of discipline and that the police commissioner has final authority. He can either accept the discipline, he can modify it, or he can simply throw it out. Generally, it's modified, and once it's modified, that throws what's called the concurrence rate off. But I think people see that, and they believe because the commissioner has that kind of authority, then the process is stacked against the complainant. That is not the case. I don't think the situation is stacked against the complainant, and we're working with the commissioner to get closer and closer to concurrence on recommended discipline. I'll say one other thing, and then go ahead, Rohann.
But you do understand, though, that having that confidence as a citizen in knowing that it's going to be fair and that it's going to be listened to is significant in the process.
And we're doing everything we can to increase people's confidence in this process. I think the success with the Daniel Pantaleo case, most people in New York don't know that the CCRB was the last resort for the Garner family for getting any justice around Pantaleo and around the death of Eric Garner. The DA in Staten Island took a pass. The Justice Department took 5 years and did nothing. And the CCRB, under our authority given to us by the charter, brought charges, voted to bring charges against Officer Pantaleo. We have the authority to prosecute those more serious cases in a departmental trial. We prosecuted the case in a departmental trial. Won. We prevailed. The judge agreed with us. We recommended termination. The judge agreed with that. We sent it over to the commissioner, and the first person to review it and agree with us is the man sitting right there, First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker, and supported the recommendation to the commissioner, and the commissioner agreed, and Officer Pantaleo was fired. So CCRB has a great deal of potential to do a lot more for the people of the city of New York and for the department. And so we're working hard to engage folks, community meetings, youth advisory council, speaking at state legislature, city council, doing events like this so that the public knows that they have a recourse. When they have an unpleasant experience with the New York City police officer, they've got a place to go, and that's the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. All
right, we're gonna play that video in a few moments, but I want to get to let me go back to Congressman Hakeem first. There's a question here from Damian Bascom. He's on YouTube, watching on YouTube, and it's following up on what you said. National use of force standard sounds great, but are there any procedures that will keep the DOJ office of civil rights from being politically manipulated? Do you have a response to that, sir?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's an area of concern because, you know, the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights, when you have a Attorney General like Bill Barr, who's out of control right now in a wide variety of areas, and is appearing to manipulate things on behalf of friends of the current president in other areas, there's reason to be suspicious. And so it's a tremendous point that is being raised. One of the steps that we take in the Justice and Policing Act is to give the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights independent subpoena authority so that they can collect information and gather facts without having to necessarily go through the process that is set up currently, where the Attorney General is required to sign off effectively and can effectively kill an investigation. Now, when you have an administration that embraces the notion of our current civil rights statutes, such as the previous one or the Clinton administration, then you're not as concerned about the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights being politicized and hamstrung. But there's every reason to be concerned in a situation like this. And so part of what the legislation does is to try to create some degree of independence for the office that would be responsible for prosecuting abusive or violent or brutal officers. The other thing that the legislation does is to create some independent authority for state attorney general offices as another layer of protection that is removed from the day-to-day interaction with the police department. Because traditionally the concern has been that the district attorneys have an institutional relationship with the police department, working hand in hand in terms of prosecuting acts that are brought to them that are criminal in nature by the police department. That's an institutional relationship that we can all understand exists, but it creates an inherent conflict of interest. And so one of the things that we do in this legislation is to create some independent capacity for review of these cases by state attorney general offices. So there's another layer. In New York State, to Governor Cuomo's credit, in the aftermath of the demand for action because of the injustice in the criminal context, and I'm thankful for the work, certainly of the CCRB and for Ben Tucker, our Deputy Commissioner's recommendation in terms of providing some measure of accountability at the end of a 5-year process for Mrs. Carr and the Garner family. But here in New York, subsequent to the Garner case, if someone is killed in a violent police encounter and that someone is an unarmed civilian, because of an executive order that we push for issued by Governor Cuomo, the investigation is no longer done by the local district attorney's office. It's done by the attorney general's office.
Okay.
In this case, Attorney General Tish James, who we can all feel more confident in, would independently evaluate the facts objectively and make prosecutorial decisions a little bit removed from the day-to-day institutional relationship that exists between the local DA and the police department. So that's a good thing that exists in New York State, and we hope to take that model across the country.
All right, we're going to be getting to some questions. I see a question here from Shane. We're going to get to those a little bit for Commissioner Ben, but I want to get to Dr. Blue. I got to get Dr. Blue in now, so I've got to change it up a little bit, and then we're going to show that video in a minute. In fact, let's go to the video. We'll take it to the video talking about the CCRB video, and then we come back to Dr. Blue. Play that video for us, please.
It's supposed to be like any normal day. My friends and I just finished playing basketball and we're heading home. We didn't realize there was an officer behind us, and when we saw him, we pulled to the side to let him pass. He got out of his car. He shoved us against the fence and asked us questions like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And I didn't know what to do. I just told him we were playing basketball and I was heading home, but he didn't believe me. He ended up putting us in handcuffs, put us in the car, and took us to the precinct. My mom told me to call the CCRB. I called them, filed a complaint against the officer, and they turned my complaint into an investigation.
Police misconduct affects us all, and my family experienced it firsthand. My name is Emerald Garner, the daughter of the late Eric Garner, and the CCRB was there for both me and my family. The agency launched an independent investigation, prosecuted the officer, and ultimately he was fired. The CCRB is an important resource for all New Yorkers, especially young people. If you encounter police misconduct, call the CCRB.
Every New Yorker has a right to be treated with respect during an encounter with the NYPD.
If you feel like that right has been violated at any time or any place,
Report it to the CCRB.
and we're working to get this message out to young people.
Police misconduct affects all of us.
And we want you to know that the CCRB is here for you.
The agency investigates police misconduct by the NYPD, so call them and report.
And we still have a long way to go in improving police interactions with young people.
But the city is committed to involving us in the conversation and making sure young people are a part of the solution.
We are members of the Youth Advisory Council and the CCRB.
So there you have it, a video on the CCRB that you can have access if you want to have a complaint that you want to process and or file. So let's go to Pastor Dr. Dedrick Bloom. It is said that a society is built on three things: religion, justice, and economics. COVID-19 hit us from a health standpoint, but hit the economics. We're talking about the justice issue. And now pastors have a significant role. The church has a significant role to play in the community. What role do you think the church, and we know you're a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, but what role does the church have to play on issues of social justice? And how can we build the bridge on better policing community relations? Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself. There you go. There you go.
You asked a mouthful of questions.
I'm sorry.
But first of all, I want to say it's an honor to be here with this distinguished panel, and I do appreciate so very much the work of the commissioner and the CCRB. But I'm also very much in harmony with the statements of our congressman, who said that if you really want to see change, it has to be enacted by law. We have to have standards, and those standards need to be national standards. There are about 19,000 different police departments around the country, and everybody has different standards. So at some point, we need standards.
Excuse me, Pastor. Can you get a little closer to the mic, because your voice is coming in very, very slight.
Yeah, I think I have a problem with my microphone. Is that better?
Yeah, much better. Just that.
All right. What I was saying is, we do need national standards in policing. Thank you for the work of the CCRB. Thank you so very much, Commissioner. But we need independence. We need independence examination of these cases as they come up. So I'm very, very excited about the Justice and Policing Act 2020. You ask what churches can do? Well, right now, churches are busy protesting. Churches need to get out there and make sure that people register to vote. Churches need to make sure that we have census taking so that we have proper representation. churches need to be making sure that they're still on the streets advocating for the passage of this bill, because just because a bill is introduced doesn't mean that it's going to be legislation. There's a long way to go, and there's a long, hard fight that we have to fight. But then, thirdly, churches can meet on a regular basis. I'm part of the Bronx Clergy Coalition, Police Clergy Coalition. I spent 2.5 hours a day with Inspector Hernandez, sitting down with other clergy people, talking about what we can do in our community to have better relations with our officers. I asked him an important question that I think was an important question for me to ask as a clergy person. We often talk about the violence that is perpetrated on us as citizens, but as police officers who are out there on the streets on a daily basis, they're putting their lives on the lines. They're working long hours and difficult shifts. I asked them the question, well, what can be done for that officer? Obviously, you have officers under a great deal of stress. The divorce rate among officers is 75%. You have a high suicide rate amongst officers. So we are taking people who are fragile and we're putting them on the streets in communities that are marginalized. And we're asking these officers to do a difficult job without the necessary emotional balance sometimes that they need to do the job. And so churches can begin to advocate on behalf of officers to have those kinds of things in place. There's other things. One final thing, and I could talk all night because I'm a preacher, but I shan't. The true challenge that we have, we want to change policing practices in America. We have to come to the intersection between the church and economics. Poor people end up in jail and in prison. Poor people are disproportionately have bad confrontations and fatal confrontations with police. We have noticed in New York City, when the economy does well, crime goes down. When everybody's boat is being lifted, then there's less crime because everybody's enjoying the fruits of the bounty. In America, we have to move to the place where we get everybody enjoying the fruits of the bounty. We'll need less policing and more directing of resources toward community building and community development.
Very much. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I want to get back to Congressman Hakeem Jeffries on a point in a minute. So if we can bring him back in there, he's here. And then I'm coming back to you, man, you tell me to say Ben, but I keep saying Commissioner Tucker.
Well,
Just so forgive me, man. All right, I'm coming back to you, Ben.
No, it's good.
So, Congressman, do you think that it is this situation that we have? Do you think we would be, as a nation, be able to bridge the political divide and do what's right for the good of our country on the issue of racial disparity as a federal legislative act? I know there's something about the HEROES Act. I didn't get into it as much. I don't know the details of it, and I must confess that. But I know that there's some legislative, and we're not trying to pick sides. I know we're not trying to be on any one side on this. Which I think it's, unless we come together, we'll never be able to. But do you, as a legislator, do you see a common ground where we'll be able to come together and do some legislative reform as the way forward, not to penalize, but to make it better and for all of us, especially people of color?
Yes, Rohann, I'm certainly hopeful. And what we've seen throughout America and indeed throughout many parts of the world are young folks, in particular, led by young African-American, Caribbean-American women, but joined by people of every race, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American. It's multiracial, it's multi-generational, it's multicultural, and it reflects
All right, it's breaking up a little bit there. All right, so we'll give him a little second to readjust his internet connection. Let's go to Ben. I got a question for you now. Should black and brown men, are you there, Congressman Hakeem? All right, we give him a second to reconnect. While he's reconnecting, Commissioner Tucker, should black and brown men join the NYPD as a means of finding a solution to this problem, the way forward? That's what we're talking about tonight. What's the average salary of an NYPD? Is it something that, of a police officer, is it something that you encourage in our black and brown men and women to be a part of this? And is it a part of the solution?
Oh, absolutely a part of the solution. Listen, if I wouldn't be sitting here today if that question was asked of someone else back in 1969, if someone would have asked that question, the same answer is true. Yes, you absolutely should take the job. We are encouraging you to come in. The sad part is that while we've made incredible strides with respect to the increase in Hispanics within and Latinos within the department and women over the years, but with respect to black males, we are pretty much where we were just a couple of ticks. So we average now about 12 to 13%, and at any given time, some of our classes run higher, some lower. But when it goes up higher, it's usually because of the female African Americans who are in that count. So we average on with both genders, we end up with around 16% on average. But yes, I mean, we need to, and we speak with, and I love that CCRB ad and commercial, because it focused on young people, and so we've created. When I came back, I thought about we need a pipeline. We need something that will have our ability to touch young people from the very early parts of their lives, and so we have a youth council that's established, that's run out of our community affairs division for starting at 9 years old. And then, around 14, we have an explorers program that's actually national, but it's one of the largest contingents of explorers are come out of New York and out of the NYPD in particular, but other jurisdictions, other parts of the criminal justice as well. All of that is good, but we do need to engage with and focus on both, not just at-risk youth, but youth in general. How do we touch our kids, and first of all, help them overcome any fears that they have about who the police are? I mean, that's a real challenge. And so, yeah, I think we don't have any shortage of people applying for the position, but I wish that more were applying, and we now target our recruitment to those areas where we know the Black communities, where we hope to entice people to take the job, young men in particular.
I think that's very well said about recruiting, especially in the African American community and Black and brown community, is significant to help to bring about the change that's needed. I'm glad Congressman Hakeem Jeffries is back. So, Congressman, I'm going to give you the opportunity to finish what you're saying in response to being hopeful. You're talking about being hopeful that we'll be able to come together as a nation and do what's right and good for our country while the world is watching. So I'll let you finish that. Then I'm going to come back to you, Commissioner. I've got a question from Shane Ray. We're going to come back to you on that here. Let's go to you, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. You can finish up what you're saying.
Okay, Rohann, no, thank you very much. And one of the things that I think is important about this moment is that it's a movement, of course, that's being led by young African American and Caribbean American women who are out in the community day after day after day in such an authentic and passionate and intellectually robust way. But it's joined by people of every race, multiracial, multicultural, multinational, multi-generational. And so there's reason to believe that it will be different this time. And we've seen action that confirms that hypothesis. In New York State, I was so pleased to see that legislation that is patterned after the bill I introduced in Congress that would criminalize the chokehold passed the New York State Assembly yesterday, 140 to 3. That means that every single Republican in the Assembly, with the exception of just 3 individuals, voted for a bill opposed by many of our police unions. And then in the New York State Senate, the vote was even stronger, 62-0 to criminalize the chokehold. Every single Republican in the New York State Senate voting in favor of taking this very important step. And so that is swift action. And you'll continue to see that hopefully at every level of government. You'll see action at the city council level, and we'll see action here in Washington. We have our bill, but Senator Tim Scott apparently has been charged by Mitch McConnell to work on a Republican-based Senate proposal to address police reform issues. And hopefully that'll provide the foundation for being able to find some common ground and do something meaningful, because the moment demands it right now.
Thank you so much. Well said. Well said. Commissioner Tucker, Shane has had his question here. Let me see if I can put it up. It says there's a growing call for funds to be redirected from policing towards social revenues. Do you support this call? Do you envision a social services arm in the NYPD that sees social workers, for example, going to scenes of 911 calls, social workers that may operate under the shield, even if not sworn as peace officers?
All great questions. And yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those times where we've taken a close look at the budget with a view toward knowing that we need to contribute and to particularly for our youth services. Ironically, when Commissioner Shea was appointed, his principal interest and is now part of the main plan that we have, the 2020 plan, focuses on youth engagement, focuses on how do we, as an agency, connect more effectively with young people. We, as I said, we've done that. I speak to a lot of young people, travel around, and we are connected with them in a variety of ways, but there's still a lot more to do. And so we're focusing on that. So to the extent that like, for example, the real issue for the summer is that we're going to have, without the youth employment program, lots of young people unoccupied and perhaps. And so we are, as we were in the budget process now, and we're looking at, along with the mayor, thinking about just what we might do in that regard. So yeah, I think it's sort of, it just makes sense. There are proposals on the table. They're just proposals at the moment for taking, youth services out of the NYPD, or talk about moving school safety agents back to the school, the Department of Education, perhaps. Or so there are lots of ideas, and I think this is one of those moments where we should be bold in how we look at what we should be doing and how we spend our dollars. And so those conversations are taking place right now, and they're not just, we're very serious about what we are trying to accomplish. And so I'm hopeful that as we go forward and we make those decisions, that certainly we make them in a way that adds value to, particularly to the way in which we serve our young people.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So to Congressman Hakeem and to Dr. Dedrick Blue, you both can take this question, tear it apart, and put it back together. But what are some economic reform initiatives as a way forward that you think should be adopted to provide economic empowerment to communities of color? Dr. Blue, you've got a colleague here. I think he said you were spot on in leaving out the issue of economics, and the church is obviously to that fact. The bridge must be built and must be crossed. That's from Dr. James Black. So following up on that comment, what economic reform initiatives do you think are possible and should be adopted to provide economic empowerment to communities of color? Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Dr. Dedrick Blue.
Let me yield to Pastor Blue as a man of the cloth, first, and then I will respond. And then I'll have to excuse myself, Rohann, because I've got a Judiciary Committee hearing on the policing bill that we are meeting to prepare for tomorrow morning. But I'll address the question after Pastor Blue.
Sure, no problem. And we are just about the time, so I thank you for staying with us and honoring the time, sir. Thank you so much.
When we talk about economic issues and economic development in communities of color, particularly in New York City, there's a critical issue that's facing the city right now that is going to require a massive amount of coalitioning and a massive amount of resources placed behind it. In the month of April, there were 880,000 rental units that went unpaid. People could not pay their rent. And if that continues on with the downturn in our economy and other things, then we may be looking at possibly 2 to 2.5 million people who stand to be evicted from their homes because we haven't found a way to patch that up. We have to deal with the issue of affordable housing. Right now, in this city, people are being displaced and moved out of their communities. And Manhattan has become a playground virtually for the wealthy. It's getting so bad that our police officers, our first responders, our teachers cannot even afford to live in the city that they serve. And so we have to find ways to deal with issues of affordable housing, but also issues of business development, small business development. We have seen in this economic downturn that small businesses really are the backbone of our country. And yet we see small businesses being displaced as we find gentrification happening within our city. So we have to find ways to protect small businesses, support small businesses, protect the tenants and the small landlords if we're going to have a base for economic development in our city moving forward.
I certainly agree with everything that Pastor Blue just laid out. And we've got to deal with the racial justice questions that have been with us here in America since we were first brought to these shores in 1619, and we've never fully worked through and resolved. We have come a long way. We still have a long way to go, as the events of the last several months have illustrated, both in the context of the public health crisis. Our communities have been disproportionately and adversely impacted for a variety of reasons, including the fact that we're disproportionately overrepresented amongst frontline essential workers. And so we were overexposed to the coronavirus on the public health side. And then because we're under-resourced at the same period of time, suffer from pre-existing conditions that increase the toxicity around COVID-19. Then, of course, with respect to the economic distress that was caused, we've been hit harder than anyone else. And so that was a buildup to what we have arrived at in terms of this moment that cannot be ignored. And you layer on top of it, of course, the Ahmaud Arbery situation, and then the Breonna Taylor situation, and then the Central Park situation where race was weaponized against a Harvard-educated bird watcher who posed no threat to anyone. But he was a Black man, and that was enough to try to weaponize the fragility and the privilege and the arrogance that existed. And then, of course, George Taylor being Floyd being the straw that broke the camel's back. But it was an accumulation of things. And so we can't just solve the challenge by focusing on police reform. That's just a part of the challenge. And so congressionally, we understand that the HEROES Act, Rohann, that you mentioned, is designed to kind of address some of the disparities. We include $175 billion in funding to help provide assistance with people paying their mortgage and their rent, whether they're homeowners or renters. We have another round of direct stimulus payments to the American people, and we increase the amount that can go to a family per child from $500 to $1,200. And so, for instance, a family of 5 would receive $6,000. Family of 4, $4,800. We extend out the unemployment insurance enhancement, which is currently scheduled to expire on July 31st. We extend that into the early part of next year. And we do a variety of other different things necessary to try to get us through the moment. But then we need to do transformative things to truly make an economy possible where every single American, regardless of race, can benefit from the fundamental American contract, which is if you work hard, as our community does, play by the rules as we do, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family. And all we're asking for ever is just to have the same opportunity as everyone else. And if we have that opportunity, I'm confident that we will be able to excel in our pursuit of the American dream. So I thank you, Rohann, for being such a phenomenal moderator.
Thank you for coming.
And it's been great to be on this very distinguished panel, and look forward to worshiping during the Sabbath with many of you and seeing many of you when I'm back in New York.
Yes, sir. And looking forward to hearing you break the word again one day.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you for all you do and for representing us there in Washington. Thank you so much, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
All right, great. All right, so I'm gonna let's get to coming back to you, Reverend Fred Davie. I know you said you've been silent. We've been talking about the CCRB gets a big play out today, but Ben, man, you're gonna have to forgive me, man. But here we go. There's a question here for you, sir. And let me, before I put it, I know the question is up, but let me just say this. I know you can understand that there is genuine fear among Black young males, particularly, and of course females, but of how their engagement with the police force, whether it's justified or not in their minds, it's real. Whether up in terms of a person's opinion, whether it's justified or not, it's real. And so, how do we address the stigma between the police force and the Black community? And I think that's where this question is coming from. He's a young man, Jeffrey Willis. And he's asking, in order to encourage Black youth to want to join the police force, by the way, which I advocate for, give full support to that, there needs to be a change in the stigma of police in our community. What are your suggestions for beginning that paradigm shift?
Right. So it's a great question. And let me just say that when it comes to Black youth, particularly Black young men and boys who have fear and worry about and what the impact will be if they encounter a police officer. When they're walking down the street and they see a police car rolling by, their heart starts to beat a little faster, and they begin to wonder, and then trying to figure out just what to do. Do I run? Do I walk? Do I just go about my business? Will I be okay? That's the kind of feeling you have, and I can relate to it because I used to be one of those kids. So, but I tell you that only because you can't. I hope that we can reach a point in time where young people are willing to take the chance, and those young people that I come into contact with in different schools, but also those who become part of our youth council and then become explorers. If that's something they're interested in, but also become police cadets while they're getting their college degree. They can be paid and work part-time until they get the requisite credits to come on the job and they turn the 21. So that's one pipeline. But we really need to, to your question, the young men in particular have to take a leap of faith. But in taking that leap of faith, to reach out. I mean, we've got basketball games, we've got soccer, we've got a whole range of activities that take place as part of a Saturday Night Lights program that are now 20 gyms open. No sense having all these gyms in the city and have them closed up, particularly on the weekends and during the evenings. And so we've done that. So we're reaching out, and I think that process under our new Deputy Commissioner Chauncey Parker, Deputy Commissioner for Community Partnerships, will drive this, and he's already on that path. We also, through our police foundation, working with young people, and we hook them by getting them involved in virtual reality type programs and have them come in and create scenarios between. And this is interesting. So we create scenarios, they create scenarios and act out being one police officer dealing with one youth will be a police officer, the other will be a youth, and then they have dialogue and conversations. And they've gotten extremely creative at creating these scenarios to really kind of get into trying to break down just and maybe reduce the tension around and the fear around interactions with police. I will say that we've got police officers on this job, I mean, that are incredible. And I think the majority are incredible in what they do in their part-time, in their off time, or, when they're working, depending on their assignments, interaction with young people in various ways. And it's an extraordinary story to tell. But I would say that number one, if you are interested and you're afraid, you could contact me and I will put you in touch with, and I come out and speak to young people all the time. So, because I think it's important when I do, and I'm talking about 6th graders, 7th graders, high school, college. For me, it's important for you to know that what's possible. And for me, as a kid who grew up in Bed-Stuy, raised by a single mom, to be doing what I'm doing today was possible, even at a time in this country when it wasn't popular to be a Black youngster in any of our neighborhoods in this city. So, it is, there are those options available to you, and certainly, to the extent that you have other questions and you think I can respond to them or answer them, I'm open to having you contact me and we can have that discussion. But we are certainly looking at that now.
Great. All right, we're going to be coming down to the end. We've got a couple of more questions. I'm going to be asking Dr. Blue to kind of give us a summation of what should we be looking for as an ideal, as the way forward in terms of police-community relations. I give you a few minutes to process that, Dr. Blue. What are some of the ideals you think as a nation, as a city, we should be looking for and should be doing when it relates to police community relations? But let me go to you, Pastor Reverend Fred Davie. There was a question that was asked here by I think Damian Bascom. But before he asks the question, let me go to you are a co-convener of the Clergy Advisory Council's Public Safety Committee for Mayor Bill de Blasio. And so my question to you is, how important, as a chair of the CCRB, you respond to the complaints by a citizen against a police officer? How important in your mind, heart, and soul is an NYPD officer?
Well, clearly, the city needs the department, and we need people to protect us. When we dial 911, we expect a response, and we expect a swift and an effective response. So the department is really important. Policing is a noble profession, as my good friend Ben Tucker represents, and as members of my family, late uncle in Charlotte, police officer, late cousin here in New York, was police officer for years. So it is a noble profession, but it's a profession that comes with an enormous amount of authority. And that gun and that badge present an automatic power differential between that officer and the people they engage. So it's a job and a profession that has to be implemented and executed with a lot of intentionality, very seriously and very soberly. Sometimes that does not happen, and when that does not happen, then it's the job of agencies like the CCRB to step in and try to effect some corrective action. Let me make one more point, and I'll stop because I know the hour's late. That is it. We have a history in this country of policing having been used to enforce racial order and social order and oppression and repression of political ideas. I think every enlightened person in any law enforcement agency knows that has to stop. And there is bias in the system. And there is a tendency for that bias to express itself more to Black and brown men and boys than any other demographic. That has to be rooted out. And every enlightened person in law enforcement knows that has to be rooted out. So we got a big task ahead of us. The issues are glaring. They're in front of us. They can no longer be swept under the rug. And it's time for us, and I think we are, to go to work. But we got to be serious about this thing. This can't be a popular uprising for the moment, and then we go back to business as usual. We got to be serious, and we found a way forward. Now we just have to pursue it, Rohann.
All right, great. Let's see if you can take this question in 30 seconds, and then we get to Dr. Blue, because we got to end. We went over our time, but this has been a really informative session today. Has the CCRB recommended any whistleblower protection policies for any police officer who informs the leadership about any excessive use of force?
I think there are applicable whistleblower policies in the state now that would work here. But I want to say that I think under this current leadership, anybody who comes out, any officer who exposes corruption, I think under the current leadership, at least, can do so safely. And certainly any officer that reports anything to the CCRB can do that safely. And officers have. Believe it or not, we've had complaints from New York City police officers against other New York City police officers. So, but I think the whistleblower protection is already there.
All right, great.
If I could.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're sure. Go ahead.
That point, that's a really good point. I mean, we don't call it a whistleblower, but we require our officers. It's in our, the same use of force. We rewrote our use of force policy some time ago, but part of what's in that and has been for decades is this requirement for police officers who witness other officers engaging in any conduct that is prohibited to either intervene at the time if an officer is engaging with an encounter with a citizen and the contact is inappropriate. It requires the other officers or officers who are there to intervene, and if they don't, and there's an investigation, then those officers are going to be subject to scrutiny and certainly discipline as well. But what you would hope is, frankly, that forget about the threat of discipline. You would hope that, Fred said that this is a noble profession, and it is. People who become police officers usually take it because they want to provide service, they want to help, and that's who we want. If you come to this department and you have other intentions about why you became a police officer, then the job's not for you. And to the extent that we find out it isn't, and we do that very often, if we have instances where the conduct of even new officers is so abhorrent. So that's, we have to create a culture, and sometimes it's difficult to do that, but we have to change the culture and create a culture where officers feel comfortable doing that and not having to debate whether they should intervene or tap the officer and their partner on the shoulder and say, I'll take care of this, I got it, to slow things down, de-escalation, right? That's the goal. That's what we teach now. That's what we expect. And so between CCRB, CCRB, NYPD, we are part of the same structure. I don't see CCRB as over here and we're over here. We are inextricably connected because we have a vested interest in the same thing. So it is that I think, and with Fred and I, we have this relationship. Fred and I we speak honestly with each other. I'm not bashful about telling Fred when I got what's on my mind and what I think some of the board members are doing wrong. When I think they're acting more like advocates rather than objective arbiters of the facts. Fred knows, right? But he's not bashful about that with me. So
if you need prayers,
No, we've
If you
had
need a
some,
prayer intervention, Dr. Blue will mediate
yeah,
between
right,
you
right.
two.
We've had some interesting breakfasts. So, Dr. Blue, you should give us your phone number so we can call you.
I offer Dr. Blue as the mediator.
We get Dr. Blue
Yeah.
One last thing. I know we are out of time, please, but just give me 30 seconds more. There's much talk about this defunding police. Anybody wants to respond to that?
Let me say something. Ben hit on it, and I think it's the right. I do think we need. Well, first of all, you can't not have a police department. That's just. I mean, it's it's utopian and it's a nice idea, but it's not practical. But we do need to look at how the force is spending money, how the department is spending money, as the commissioner has said, and see if there are ways that we can redirect some of that. And we need to look at to see if there are things that the department is doing that it shouldn't be doing, and then deal with those issues as well. When you've got what do you now, $6 billion budget?
$6 billion, yeah.
$6 billion budget.
I think they inflated it actually. It's 5 and change the last time I looked.
Oh, Ben.
But 6, you know, who's you know.
Man, it's really like there's a slight difference between the 5 and the 6 billion. Like seriously,
sooner or later we're going to be talking about real money here, but there's enough of it. If a fraction of it were redirected, I think it would make a huge difference. And I think that there's a commitment to really looking at this budget from the commissioner, mayor, and the city council, and we need to do that.
I think the branding, and this is my personal opinion, I probably shouldn't say it, but I see the branding creates a lot of confusion with the whole element of the defund. So I think people have to dig to get the real essence of what they're trying to do. So, but Dr. Blue, take it away.
Well, listen, I just want to say something about defunding. I'm a preacher, right? So I read my Bible. My Bible said all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Therefore, I need police. I mean, no, the reality is, I know that there are some advocates who are calling for complete dismantling of police departments. That doesn't make any sense. I want to say this. I have appreciated the discussion because the discussion has tended to be holistic. So, for example, we do know we have some challenges that need to be addressed by CCRB, right? We know that the CCRB only has power to recommend. They don't really have power to determine a sentence. And so we do appreciate also the desire to recruit police officers and to change the culture from within. And so we need both the CCRB and we need the commissioner in there to help change the culture from within and to nudge that culture, from a CCRB. The role of the church, however, is to be that moral agent, that moral fly in the ointment, that irritant that is constantly pushing and calling for the highest ideals. Whether or not we reach those highest ideals is something that we can debate, but the church's role is to call for those highest ideals. The church has the responsibility to hold into account individuals who have positions of authority. Like you say, the moment that you get a gun and a shield, that's a lot of authority, right? It's a lot of authority. The church must hold people into account for that as well. But also, the church needs to understand and help our politicians understand that budgets are moral documents, in that budgets align resources and priorities with the money. And so if money is being misdirected or redirected in ways that are not beneficial to the people who it's supposed to serve, then the moral agent needs to be that vehicle that speaks up and challenges that and calls people to the table. Finally, I think that the church has the responsibility to continue to build bridges. The church can't just be about complaining about police and police officers. The church has to do things like invite police officers into your congregation. We do that at my church. We talk with them. We invite them to prayer meeting and pray for them. We sit down and dialogue with our 40 our precincts and our precincts officers, because it's so important for us to be able to do this. When we look at this, we're talking about lives that are on the line. And so we have to work together from the inside, on the inside, pressing those on the inside, and then those of us who are on the outside, being the moral agent, sometimes in the street protesting, sometimes bringing to attention things that need to be brought to attention so that those who are working on the inside can have the authority that they need to say, hey, listen, this is important to the people. You've got to listen. And so I want to thank these distinguished panelists for the work that they do and how they're making a difference, and how we think that we all can agree that we have to work together if we're going to move forward from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor
Amen to
Blue,
that.
and all that you do.
Thank you. Excellent. Well said. And I'll just put this up here. Let me see if I can do this. I know I'm not directing tonight, but that's Benjamin Tucker. That happened on Sunday. Dr. Blue and a couple of us from the Seventh-day Adventist Church had your police officers there. We didn't lay hands on them physically, but over them as we prayed for, because we don't believe that it's black versus blue. It's right against wrong. And we have to see how we can build a bridge. And we're just so happy that you took the time to be with us this evening for this very important conversation, the way forward. Everything has its place, the marches, the protests, and all of that. Those things raise awareness and all of that. But the significant conversation now of legislative acts, we're Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, his presence on some of the HR 4408 and other legislative acts that have probably been passed in New York State's Senate, as well as in the federal level, that can address the elephant in the room and see how we can strive to be a better nation, strive to be better people, and strive to be that nation that Dr. Martin Luther King dreamed about. Thank you very much, Reverend Fred Davie from the CCRB. I think it's significant that people ought to know that there's a recourse. There's actually a system, and the system works very well. If there's an issue, there's a channel. CCRB is there, that you can have that constructive process. We're not here against police officers. We're here to address the wrong and do the right, but at the same time build a great relationship with our police force. Thank you, Dr. Blue, for your words of inspiration, for the time. The other panelists that were here, we lost Dr. Martin this evening. He had a technical issue there. I hope the conversation will be able to continue from here, because it's a change that begins with each of us in our sphere of influence. We sometimes wait for somebody else to begin the change, but the change starts with us. So as I close as a facilitator and host for this evening's panel on the way forward. Here are some of the things that we'd like you to take away, be a part of the change. Number one, if you're black or from the black or brown community, the call is join the police force if that's something you would like to do, and don't fear it. If you want to be a police officer, join it. Change can only happen if you're part of the change, so be a part of it. And secondly, fill out your census. Essential services are needed, so make sure you fill out your census. If you've gotten that in the mail, do fill out your census. If you have a complaint, if you have something, a concern, of course, file a complaint with the CCRB. There it will be fair to you and fair to the officer, so that the process can be fairly administered and you will have a fair hearing on your complaint. It is my hope that you have received the blessing tonight. To our panelists and to those of you who have been watching, thank you very much. Have a great evening and God bless.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Americans are on the streets in protest again tonight, 11 days since the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. So far, the police have been peaceful. We're going to keep an eye on the situation throughout the evening, because with these mass protests, we are seeing tons of police activity and tons of people with smartphones out on the streets recording the police doing their jobs. It's given us more of a picture of what policing in America looks like than we almost ever get, even if